Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. Good afternoon. In case you haven't noticed, you are at Spheres of Power in the 21st Century with Monica Duffy Toft, Professor of International Politics and Director of the Center for Strategic Studies at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. My name is Marianne Hunt, and I'm the Director of Lifelong Learning in the Office of Alumni Engagement. And as part of my job, I get to work with our faculty across all of the schools. I get to hear about all of their exciting research to put together programs just like this, as well as our faculty webinars and through our Travel Learn program. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our Fletcher grads in the audience. Fletcher is a point of pride for Tufts and attracts top minds in diplomacy, there we go, from around the world. We are very excited to be able to highlight this during our reunion programs, and that Monica has agreed once again to present our reunion programs. We have left time at the end for some Q&A, so a little bit like being in the classroom without exams or tests, I think, right?
We'll see.
But with that in mind, please do wait for my colleagues to get to you with their microphones because we do have live streaming going on, as well as the microphone will allow the other people in this room to be able to hear your great questions. When we start planning our reunion talks, which is more than 6 months before reunions happen, it can feel a little daunting to find topics in the areas of geopolitics and international relations that do not risk being out of date over 6 months later. But I never have to worry about that with Monica because she has a way of pulling all of the insights out of history that have ongoing relevance even in our quickly changing world. It's almost uncanny how today's topic seems to have become even more relevant since she agreed to do this. And given the recent news, I'm sure many people will have some strong feelings in addition to great questions. So I would just ask you to remember to be respectful and mindful. This is an academic presentation. Monica's super great and engaging, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And I want to make sure that you get to your questions. When we get to you, if you have a question, please try to be succinct and get to it because, again, we have a lot of people in the room, and it'd be nice to be able to accommodate as many of the questions as we can before we have to leave. A lot of us have things we have to do after this that we have to run off to. So with that, I would like to introduce Professor Toft. Monica Duffy Toft is professor of international politics and director of the Center for Strategic Studies at the Fletcher School for Law and Diplomacy, as I already mentioned. Before joining Fletcher, Professor Toft taught at Oxford University's Botvinnik School of Government, Harvard University's John F. Kennedy's School of Government. While at Harvard, she directed the Initiative on Religion and International Affairs and was the assistant director of the John M. Olin Institute for Strategic Studies. She received her master's and PhD in political science from the University of Chicago and her bachelor's in political science and Slavic languages and literature from the University of California, Santa Barbara. Prior to this, she spent 4 years in the United States Army as a Russian linguist. Her areas of research include international security, ethnic and religious violence, civil wars, and demography. Her recent books include, and these are all separate books, so just be patient, Securing the Peace, Political Demography, God's Century, and Dying by the Sword. In addition, she has published numerous scholarly articles and editorials on civil wars, territory and nationalism, demography, and religion and global politics. She remains a research associate at the Botvinnik School of Government and at the University of Oxford and at Harvard's Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Got to have this by now. She's a supernumerary fellow at the Brasenose College, University of Oxford, a global scholar of the Peace Research in Oslo, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. On a more personal note, I've had the pleasure of working with Monica on reunion presentations in the past. Not only is she a fabulous lecturer, she has also become one of our very popular faculty hosts on our Travel Learn program. She's always generous with her time and dedicated to engaging in thoughtful conversations with our alumni, so we are honored to have her here today with us. Thank you very much, Monica. Let's give a warm welcome.
So thank you, Marianne. And I actually want to thank Marianne especially because she introduced me to this amazing crowd of people, some of whom I've traveled with. So when you saw me hug some folks when they came in, it's because I spent a lot of intimate time overseas with them on trips. And we had an extraordinary time. The trips are fabulous. And I learned as much from them as I hope that you learned from me this afternoon. I went to Egypt with a group. I've gone to Europe. I went to Vietnam and Cambodia. And I'm heading to Japan in summer of 2027. So if you want to hear more of me, have a more piece of me, come with me to Japan. And you'll be with my husband, who I think in some ways is even more interesting, engaging than I am. So I am going to be talking about spheres of power. And I think Marianne's right. You know, I started this project about 2 years ago. I had finished a book called Dying by the Sword, which looked at the over-militarization of US foreign policy. So what I did in that book for 5 years with my fabulous students at the Fletcher School was I looked at every episode of US military intervention since the founding of this fine nation. And we're celebrating our 250th anniversary this year. And there was over 470 interventions. And we're the only group that actually also cataloged the Native American Wars, the American Indian Wars. And what's really striking about it is if you look at the data from the post-Cold War period, a quarter of those over that 250 period happened in the post-Cold War period. I found that very distressing. I'm an American. I'm a citizen. I'm a mother. I have children, both of whom are jumbos. They graduated from Tufts. I'm also a veteran. Right, and I raised my hand to defend the US Constitution. And so the idea that the US was being so egregious with the use of force, it made me concerned. So I finished that book. It's out. You can read it. It's gotten good reviews. And I just started thinking about great power, power management. If you're a strong state, how do you manage power without always resorting to the sword, right? And that got me thinking about and reading about different ways in which empires, large states, but also small states and medium states. The United States was a very small state when it started out. Our population was minimal. We had the great powers in Europe, right, quite large. But the United States started out as a small state and then became a big one. In large measure because of geography. We are blessed by 2 moats. It's very hard to get here, but also by an innovative sort of rugged individualism of people who came to this country and had the opportunity and took the opportunity to make it great. So it's led to this project. I've been working on it. The book will be coming out with Princeton. I'm hoping next year. I feel like I'm racing against time here because I really want to guide our leadership in this country about how to think about power. President Trump is just returning from China, and here you've got President Trump meeting with President Xi, and everything I'm going to talk about this afternoon, they talked about, right? So here we are at Tufts University. Our university is fantastic. It was founded in 1852, and it was founded on a hill. And I think one of the reasons for that is the founders wanted to see further. They wanted to see greater distances, and they wanted to see further in the future. I'm a faculty member of Tufts, but I'm also a faculty member of the Fletcher School. The Fletcher School was founded in 1933 by a man who was Austin Fletcher, who was not a diplomat. He was a businessman, but he was looking at the world in 1923 and concerned. So he endowed the money, and sadly, he died before the Fletcher School actually stood up. But it was the height of the Depression, and he had the foresight to say, we need smart young people trained to be thinking about law and diplomacy. And by the way, business was part of the original charter, it just wasn't part of the name. And he was right about that need. I've been here for 9 years now. I can't believe it's gone by so quickly. And I find that instinct is still needed, and it's still correct. And our students are still sort of chasing that, trying to look ahead and thinking through law and diplomacy, but also commerce moving into the future. So like I said, President Trump is just returning from Beijing, and he brought the Secretary of Defense. I'm not going to say war. It hasn't been accepted by Congress yet, but he brought the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, with him. That hasn't been done since 1972. So that tells you that war and defense issues are front and center. But he also brought a lot of corporate leaders because trade is extraordinarily important as well. So it wasn't purely a diplomatic delegation, it was also a trade delegation. And what I'm going to show you today is that it maps across 3 domains of power, which is what I talk about when I think about spheres of power. It's domains of power. It's the political, military, which is what I was trained at. Anybody know John Mearsheimer? Right? He was my professor, my chair, my mentor. He and Samuel Huntington, I consider them my sort of fathers of scholarship. Political, military. Then there's the economic trade. We can think about Kindleberger, Eichengreen. These are very famous scholars who talked about these things. But what I'm going to advance here is that we also need to be thinking about technology as another domain of power. Because technology today is very different than it was in the 19th century. And I would say that it was very different than it was in the 1950s. And I feel like in this room, I'm in the 1950s with this periodic table, right? It's really neat. I really love this space. Well, anyway, so thinking about technology as another domain of power, and if anybody followed what was going on in China, what was really on the table is rare earth elements. Taiwan, because Taiwan controls the advanced computer chips, right? So technology today is a little bit different. Cyber, satellites, Elon Musk was there, right? Satellites are really important. And satellites right now, Elon Musk is having a big say as to how the war goes in Ukraine, right? So technology, that's the argument I'm going to make. So how many of you are reading the news today and the explanations that you have just don't feel right? You just feel like they're not complete. Yeah, it's a really confusing time. So what I'm hoping is that at the end of this, that I can help you to deal with a little bit of that confusion. And so the overall thesis here is that the world you're watching isn't being helped by the explanations that you've been taught or that you've learned over time. So in 2021, the Biden administration's own intelligence community, 6 months before Russian President Vladimir Putin decided to fully invade Ukraine, he had gone in 2014, let's make no mistake. But in 2021, actually in 2022, he decided to go in full force with actually badged Russian forces. And our intelligence community, the American intelligence community, said it's not going to happen, boss. How did we get that so wrong? Then in 2001, the United States invaded Afghanistan. We had every right to do that. We were attacked. We had won that war actually by December of 2001, but we stayed there for another 20 years. It's pretty astonishing, right, that we stayed for another 20 years. Iraq, 1991, spectacular success. And we had coalition of the willing and able. 2003, not so good. We ended up with a large-scale civil war in that country. Oh, and by the way, Islamic terrorism morphing and changing and growing such that we end up having this group called ISIS and then civil war next door in Syria. 2022, Putin invades Ukraine, and the Germans find out that their gas dependency on Russia is not such a good idea. Right? Didn't anticipate this, that this would be a problem. Right? So this economic lifeline ended up becoming a tool that Russian President Putin could use, that dependency. And there was an old argument, it goes back to the 19th century, that if we could just bring Don into our trade relations, he'll then have a vested interest to make sure those trade relations stay stable. That continued to right before World War I, the idea of economic interdependence. And that idea continued through the end of the Cold War, but it didn't hold. So that German dependence on Russian gas left them very, very vulnerable. And what I would say is these aren't anomalies, right? They're a pattern, and the pattern tells you something that the explanations, the frameworks, organizing most serious analysis of world politics today can't handle them. They're missing something important. But I'd also say they're not broken. They're just only getting part of the story. So you're confused because you're thinking like, part of that seems right to me, but I'm missing another piece of it, right? So I think if you think about the broad theories, economics and stuff, They failed the significant tests, or they're failing the tests. And so I'm going to go through what I mean by that. So 7 shifts, I'm going to identify. There's probably 20. You're all brilliant people in here, Tufts graduates or friends of Tufts graduates. We go birds of the feather, right? You could probably come up with more. If you come up with some better, please share them with me. I'd love to hear them. I'm working on a book. But I'm just going to identify 7 that I think are consequential, that are remaking world politics. And the first is, I've already alluded to it, that power, I think we need to see power in 3 domains today, not just 2. John Mearsheimer sees it in 1. I'm rereading Paul Kennedy's Rise and Fall of Great Nations. Gosh, I feel like such a cruddy scholar next to him. He's a brilliant man, but for him, why do you go like that? Oh, really? Is Daniel here? Can we turn up the volume? Oh, don't move my head. Okay, so maybe I have to, I'll sash like that. Well, anyway, so Paul Kennedy's Rise and Fall of Great Nations is a brilliant book. I could not write my book without his, but it's largely how strategy and military might is linked with economics. This is how Great Britain got so big with its empire and its navy, and the United States as a continental power, and also the Russian Empire as continental powers being able to draw out all those resources. Oh, and by the way, grow big populations. So I would argue in the 19th century, that story is actually right. I think it's true. The 20th century, we start seeing technology changing things. We now have air forces. We didn't have air forces. Right? We started to see them in World War I. We saw some blimps, in the 19th century doing, surveillance. But in the 20th century is when we start seeing technology really coming on the battlefield, rifling. That's the actual burring of rifles so that they could go farther and they could go straighter. So technology always mattered, but what was really consequential of bringing in isn't until the 20th century. And I would argue in the 21st century, if we wanted to weight these, technology is up there. So the anecdote about Musk is that he denied Ukraine initially access to his satellite technology. Here is a private company denying a state, totally unanticipated. Well, he ended up restoring that. He gave Ukraine the rights to that. But today, he's actually causing Russia to not have full access. And guess what? For the last 3 months, Russia has not made territorial advances on Ukraine in the last 3 months, in part because they don't have full eyes on Ukrainian territory. So I would argue that in the modern era, that technology on its own matters much greater than it did before. So the newest of the domains is this technological one. So I'm going to spend a moment on that and explain why I think modern technology is different. So I'm coining or coming up with these terms. If there's any technologists, again, who are out there, help me if you think I'm incorrect on this. But there's 2 terms I'm advancing, which is architectural power and protocol hegemony. What do I mean by that? They're fancy falutin terms, but let's start with the GDPR. So the GDPR is the EU's data privacy laws. So it's the General Data Protection Regulations. And the Europeans are very concerned about privacy in the way that Americans are not. And so they made sure when companies started getting control of their citizens' data that they were going to be responsible with it. So they came up with a whole series of regulations that now, if you're a company wanting to operate in Europe, you have to abide by those regulations. So initially, it was architectural power. They said, if you want to do this, you have to adopt these regulations. But what happens is that over time, you're either in or out. You have to conform if you want to be part of the system, or you have to leave the system. The exit costs are very high, and the entry costs, they're not high, but once you enter. So think about 5G, think about your phones. My family is an Apple family. I cannot imagine if one of my children came to me and said, Mom, I want a Samsung phone. I'm like, oh no, I don't know how to deal with that. I have to learn a whole new network, that kind of thing. There are costs associated with adopting a given technology that makes it more expensive to leave. And so once a government or a corporation gets that architectural power, that architectural, the architectural power. And over time, it ends up becoming embedded within the system, right? So the locking in is really important. And if you want to play, right, then you're going to have to conform to this system. So with the writing the GDPR was an exercise of architectural power, but then it ended up becoming protocol hegemony. The same thing with TCP/IP, which is the internet protocols that the United States adopted first through DARPA, right? It was for people like me, a scholar, to be able to talk with other scholars. It is now the foundation on which the internet is formed. China and Russia would love to have their own internets, but it would be really costly for them to do that. Their citizens want to be part of the global universal internet, right? We have protocol hegemony. We control that. That's really, really important. So the first critical issue I want to put out here is that our power instruments, how we measure power as scholars and analysts, are broken. So what I'm doing is devising this thing, which I'm calling the Strategic Power Index, that brings together these three domains of power so that I can actually look and see, is the United States rising or declining? Is China rising or declining? Where's Brazil in all of this? Where are all these other countries? Because our current power indices do not, they either only deal with one domain of power, the political military, that's what I cut my teeth on, right? Or they deal with the economic, what's the GDP per capita, what are their trade flows, how dependent are they on exports, imports, right? And nobody really looks at the technological side. It's usually married to the economic side. They might look at patents, something like that. But we didn't have the measurement, the tools, the mechanism in order to capture where power is actually sitting today. And where power is where influence and control is, and actually where we are going to be in terms of citizens as we live our lives. And I will say modern warfare today runs on chips. Why is Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and NVIDIA in China? We cannot fly F-35s without Taiwanese chips. We cannot do it. So the integration of those three elements is really, really vital. So if you look at the different indices, you don't have to study this, whatever. It's just to show you, mine is up at the top. I'm looking at all three across time. And also, I'm looking backward and forward, although I only go back to 2000 because the data comparability issues, anybody's scholars in here, you would appreciate that. But you can see, for me, I grew up on the correlates of war. And that's just looking at GDP per capita. That's looking at size of the population and maybe number of allies. And what I'm saying is you've got to look across the entire spectrum of power. So the first is our instruments, our mechanisms have been broken. And then the second broad or critical issue is that the stabilizers are gone. Does anybody know what this picture is from? I'm going to take a guess. It's the concert of Europe. So it's from 110 years ago, 210 years ago. So it's Congress of Vienna in 1814. And the major powers of Europe, so it's Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, and France, gathered after Napoleon's defeat to redraw the borders of Europe. But it wasn't just the borders of Europe, it was the borders of the world, right? Who's going to control what where? And they drew the lines and they called it peace. It worked, actually, for almost a century, even with the perturbations of the Crimean War. We can talk about that. But generally speaking, it worked across those five great powers. And it's still studied today. I'm studying it as one of the most successful exercises in great power management in theory. And that's what I'm trying to look at, is great power management. But what the textbooks don't say is that stability, yes, it was real for some, but not for all. So the small and middle powers, they were oppressed, right? They were told what they had to do. So Ukraine today does not want to be in Russia's orbit. It just doesn't. It would rather be allied with the Europeans. And so what happens is that stability is actually on shaky grounds. And that's what happened with the concert of Europe. I already mentioned Austria. It used to be the Austrian Empire. It became the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Why? Because the Hungarians said, oh, why do we have to play second fiddle to you? They did anyway. They're Austrian-Hungary. I'm sure they debated first order. But in any event, it was on shaky grounds because in the 1840s, the 1850s, 1860s, nationalism and smaller groups started saying, well, if you could have statehood, why can't we? But the contrary, where it did work, it did stabilize for some time. And there was a logic to it. And if you look at the Cold War, so let's fast forward 130 years from there, it ran basically on the same program where you had great powers managing the system. And in this case, it was bipolar. You had the Warsaw Pact in its side, and then you had the United States and its allies, NATO, Europe, right? And it did keep peace. There was no thermonuclear war. That's a good thing. Right? But there was a lot of oppression. There was a lot of proxy fighting in the periphery or in lesser areas because the Soviet Union and the United States understood that they could not go head to head. Right? So what ended up leading to the collapse of the Soviet Union? Nationalism. Right? Because many of the entities within the Soviet space wanted independence. It's just exactly what happened with the Concert of Europe. So you get stability for some time, but eventually it breaks down. And so the point is that we can be optimistic about some accounts of international order, but stability and freedom are not the same thing. And I would argue that today's system is under the same sort of stress, right? Where you've got these middle powers wanting to challenge the great powers in order to have a say in their futures. So one of the questions as we move into multipolar system, and I think we are, at least a bipolar system, we'll see where the Europeans land. It's always a question mark. In the beauty of the European system, it's based on consensus. Consensus is difficult. If you've ever been a mother to children, there's no consensus. You do what I say. But consensus, they are running that, but it makes it more difficult for them to make decisions. But there's definitely, if you listen to President Xi, he sees China now as on equal terms with the United States. Now, whether they're fully there, it's a question mark. We can analyze it, we can debate it. In some ways it is, some ways it's not. But if you think that sphere of power logic is back in vogue, back in fashion, and we're moving into a multipolar system, or at least a bipolar system, smaller states are going to challenge this. They're going to say, we want to be here, or we don't want to be part of you. And so we may move into more instability. Okay. So the first structural shift I wanted to talk about was that power today is different. It's technological, economic, and political. The second is that there's no hegemon. There's no referee anymore. There's no reset button. Remember Obama? Reset with Putin, 2008. And what did Putin say? No, thank you, right? And there's no resolution. So these are data from my husband. Actually, he's a scholar also. And what this data are showing you is that war does not work today in the way it used to in the past. These are fights that are, the stronger side is 10 times stronger. So Don, I'm going to keep picking on you. But if I'm 10 times stronger and we go to the mat and I'm 10 times his, I'm probably going to beat him up and win, right? It's just the nature of physics. We're in a chemistry building though. Well, anyway, it's the nature of physics. However, Don's a smart guy. He's scrappy, even though he's 10 times smaller than me. He's going to run circles around me. It's kind of like David and Goliath. He's going to find his own slingshot, and he's going to poke me in the eye, and he's going to, or my Adam's apple, and he's going to crush my larynx, and I can't fight back. And this is what's happened with modern warfare, right? That smaller states, 10 times smaller, have innovating around larger states, such that when large states now go into battle, it's a 50-50 chance that they're going to win. And by the way, these data only go to 2000. I would argue that actually it's even stronger because since then we've had Afghanistan, we've had Russia and Ukraine twice, and now we've got the United States and Iran. How is that going? It's not going so well, President Trump, right? Because the Iranians are watching and learning. They're smart. They're a proud nation. Rally around the flag effect. If the United States was attacked, oh my gosh. Right? We're going to rally around the flag, President Trump, right? So it's a crapshoot. And the bottom line is that military force just does not have the same success rate that it used to in the past. And one of the mysteries for me is why our leadership doesn't see this. These data have been out there. They have been shown. My book, Dying by the Sword, President Biden read big chunks of that supposedly, and his staff. It's one of the reasons why he got out of Afghanistan. Smart man. Yes, he could have pulled out a little bit better. It could have been a little cleaner, but I'm telling you, ending wars is not clean. It was going to be messy no matter what. But the point is that they need to learn that the use of force is not working in the same way. You can do quick and dirty. We're very good at that. That Venezuelan operation was excellent. Now, whether it should have been done, totally different question. We can debate the ethics and the law of that. But quick and dirty, we're good at. Staying for a long time, going after big nations that are watching us coming, waiting for us to come, Iran, right? It's a completely different story. Second is that autocrats win before the first shot is even fired. So I just told you, you don't even want to fire the first shot. A secondary reason why you don't want to do that is they've already won. They already have their narrative straight. Even before he went into Ukraine in 2014, what did Putin say about Ukraine? It's what? Yeah, they're Nazis and it's Russian, right? So that he already had the Russian people along on his side. He was writing tracts. He wrote a beautiful tract, go read it, in August 2022, where he actually wanted to go all the way back. So if you're a nationalist, you want to go back to the most expansive point of what your nation was. And so he wanted to go to Hungary, right? So autocrats are really good about that. What about President Xi in Taiwan? What's the narrative there? Taiwan is China, right? Which is going to make the fight that much more difficult. So autocrats in particular, because they control the information space, right? And then they have institutions where they can change the space. What did Putin do? It's now part of the Constitution. Right? So now he can say, it's not my decision. I have to go to the Politburo and we have to put this to a vote in order for these 4 republics and Crimea to no longer be part of Russia. They're part of Russia. He's won the narrative story there. And by the way, he was laying the ground for that for years in advance before the first shot was fired. So, and this is through disinformation, misinformation campaigns for years. And same thing with Taiwan. Okay, trade didn't tame power. I already alluded to this, right? And what's happened is that illiberal states, we can talk about autocratic states, authoritarians, illiberal states, liberal states built these institutions so that we could all live in peace. The United Nations, we tried with the League of Nations after World War I, didn't work because the United States, our Senate wouldn't pass it, but we did get the United Nations. Then we had we had GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that became the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Association. All of these organizations are put into place so that states would have venues in order to debate and discuss and to hold one another account. And then we invited authoritarian states in, including China, but not just China, in. And what did they do? They picked and chose what they wanted, and now they're weaponizing them. It's a real challenge. It is a real challenge about what to do. So semiconductor controls, you can think about that, back to our architectural power and hegemony, right? China has already, we know this is why President Trump kind of had to go sheepishly, because China controls 60% of rare earth elements and 85 to 90% of the processing of those. Can you imagine? But Taiwan controls a ton, the advanced chips, but who controls the machines, the lithography machines that actually draws onto the wafers? It's the Netherlands. It's a Dutch company. It's ASML. Think about that integration now, that interdependence, right? So when the United States put export controls on China through Taiwan, not to get the advanced chips anymore, what did she do? Okay, fine. I'm not going to give you any more rare earth elements. And he did that. And by the way, he had done that to Japan a decade earlier. This is not new. But this weaponization, right, People weren't aware. They're not one step or two step. They're not thinking about those, the way in which it can be weaponized. But they had different ways of doing that. Okay, the strong man is the strategy. And it's sad, it's all strong men, right? Where are the women, right? But the strong man is the strategy. And what do I mean by that? So when I teach my course in international security, I need to teach another class on religion and global politics, civil wars, right? We talk about institutions, we talk about laws, we talk about regulations. We tend not to talk about individuals, or we tended not to. I think we have to talk about individuals today, right? These men, they're all men. I'm not being sexist here. It's all men. I think they're all men, right? Well, anyway, these men know each other and they call each other and they talk on the phone. They have personal relationships. Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev had a personal relationship. But they also had staff and national security councils and state departments and foreign ministries that did a lot of work behind the scenes. That is not the case today. So I have a lot of friends who work in the US government today. The National Security Council is basically defunct, right? Trump has a bunch of people working with him, and that's okay. He has the right to run his cabinet how he wants to run his cabinet. Totally fine. But what it does is it changes how decisions are made. Similarly with President Xi, anybody following what he's been doing with his military, with his cabinet, he's basically been purging. First, he ended term limits on his presidency, and now he's purging anybody who could be in opposition to him because he wants to be in power forever. Putin, after 2008, he comes in, he was anointed by Yeltsin, yes, you shall be president. Then they hold elections, right? And then he spends all of his time consolidating the Russian Federation, pulling mayors and governors, and then appointing them. It's very Stalinist, right? Now all these people owe their careers to him. Right? He faces term limits. What does he do? He becomes prime minister, puts his buddy Medvedev in, and then he goes back and he's president again. And now they've changed it again. And by the way, it's really interesting. If you read about these men, these three in particular, him, and him, Putin, are really concerned about not only their legacy, but how long they're going to live. And so you read reports about what their visits were like, and they actually do talk about, yeah, if only we could live forever. Right? So what they're doing is they're trying to institutionalize themselves as people, as personas, right? Personification of politics. It's fairly new. And so what we want to think about, and by the way, anybody know who this guy is? We want to, yeah, Erdogan, right? Yeah, so Turkey. He's doing a nice job in Turkey, right? The one that I pulled out, I used to have Orban up there, but thankfully the Hungarians, but we'll see, we'll see if that stays. All right, so that's the fifth, is strong man as a strategy, the personification of politics. We need to pay attention to that. Read biographies. Read what makes these people tick. And I'd say these men tick. It matters, and how they conduct relations and how they run their offices. It matters in a way that I don't think mattered 20 years ago. Okay, everybody has seen this map. This is a very popular map right now, right? I hadn't seen this map before February 28th, right? Actually, I did because I was working on this, but in any event, it's because the choke points, we now, how much oil and gas flows through the Straits of Hormuz? Yeah, great. We all know that now. How much flows through Bab el-Mandeb? Anybody know where Bab el-Mandeb is? That's the next one if this doesn't resolve. It's what do you call it? It's the Red Sea, and it's Yemen controls that. Who's friends with Yemen and the Houthis? Iran. So I'm waiting for that one to be held up. 20 to 25% of world trade goes through that. And by the way, President Trump was really hoping that with the Strait of Hormuz, China gets 40% of its oil and gas from the Gulf. But they've got about 120 days of reserve because, again, they're smart. They're taking notes. They're saying, Trump's going to do it. We better get our reserves up, right? Well, anyway, so Bab el-Mandeb is another choke point. And so the point being that they had been warned. They had done simulations that if you shut down or you have a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, that it's going to be problems. But they didn't think it was going to cascade that quickly. right? And then the second, third, and fourth order impact of that. And so the point being is we tend to study events. I just told you I published a book of over 450 events of US military inventions. But the truth is it's the cascade from that and what that means as America evolved through history and through time. So you want to think about the cascade of the event over time. And again, back to ASML, this company had no idea that it was going to become part of a global trade war. They were just making lithography machines. The problem is those lithography machines have 10,000 parts, some of which come from the United States. And the United States said, those are American machines. We've got it, right? So ASML ended up getting harmed because of a United States policy because they were angry with the Chinese. So again, Fukushima, the same thing. When that melted down, it hit the car industry 6 months later because there were a lot of chemical factories in the region. 6 months later that nobody had anticipated. So you have to think about this interdependence, interconnectedness across these different domains. The seventh is temporal asymmetry. So regime response time versus whether the system can do it, right? So we can think about the Arab Spring, how quickly that went. Right? It started in Tunisia, then it goes to Egypt, then it goes to Bahrain, then it goes to Yemen, then it goes to, oh my gosh, where else? Syria, right? The Syrian civil war, right? So the temporal and the ability of states to be able to respond to that. You know, the difference is that democratic systems, in a good way, Federalist Papers told us we want to slow things up. We want to contest with one another. We want to debate. We want to deliberate. The problem is some of our adversaries, our opponents, don't have to do that. So they can make a decision in 48 hours, whereas for us, we're like, I'll get back to you on that, right? 30 days if you're lucky to get a decision. This is one of the reasons why the president has authority to strike, but then has to 30 days report to Congress, right? What he plans to do. And so Beijing, and it can plan on a 40-year time horizon, 40 years. But President Xi can make a decision within 24, 48 hours. He says go, they go, right? Democratic governments can't do either. Electoral pressure is so grave. I considered at one point a Senate run, and they asked me, I was going to run as a Republican in New York State, believe it or not, against Hillary Clinton. My name was Monica. And they said, seriously, it would have been a great campaign. But I was so appalled as a native New Yorker that this woman from Illinois could run in New York. Well, anyway, they didn't want me because I hadn't held prior office. So my response was twofold. One was, she hasn't held prior office either. And second is, I will not run for House because I'm not running and then running again and then running a Senate. At least you get a little bit of breathing space. But that pressure there, right, to please people is really, in the democratic system, means that the system's speed, you don't have that same advantage that you would if you were in an autocratic system. Okay, so let's sum up those 7 shifts. So domains of power is no longer one domain. That interconnectedness, you need to think about technology differently, right? It is absolutely different today. It's integrated in everything. Our phones are emblematic of that, right? Just the physical manifestation of what I'm holding, but also the fact that it's connected to the sky. And I'm looking at my bars, and that's my beautiful children, right? But all of that is that technology in our hands. So we really need to think about that. The disorder, the second is that the disorder, right? There is no hegemon, there's no referee. In the old days, in the 19th century, the Austrians, the French, the British, they could clonk heads together and say, knock it off, because we don't want too much instability. During the Cold War, it was the Soviet Union, United States. Today, we don't know who it is. The United States would like to be the world's policeman, maybe. I mean, President Trump actually ran on coming home. And now we have, Venezuela, perhaps Cuba, definitely Iran. But there is no hegemon. Second third is the preemption. That narrative piece is really important in this information age, thinking about the narratives that are coming out, the disinformation, the misinformation, right? And how dangerous it is for different states and for us as citizens. The weaponization, that interdependence, and the fact that illiberal regimes can take advantage of systems that we had no idea that we were vulnerable. And so thinking through that piece ahead of time. So if anybody has seen the Jacinda Ardern documentary, it's excellent. It's really, watch it. This is a leader trying to grapple, very young leader, a woman who did not expect to become the prime minister of New Zealand. I think she was 35 or 36 at the time, pregnant, by the way, with her first and only child. COVID hits right away. And she says, I have two jobs to do. I've got to keep my citizens alive, and I have to keep the nation together. And you watch this documentary and you watch, she kept her citizens alive. She shut down the nation, and they managed to get to 0 cases. And she cried the day that that happened, when there were 0 reported cases. But then the next round of boosters came through, and a lot of information and disinformation was coming from the outside, particularly from the United States, about vaccines and how vaccines are dangerous. And she lost the nation. And that's why she said, I'm out. I'm not going to be the prime minister anymore. This is too difficult. So disinformation, that information, that preemption there. And then the weaponization, the personalization. I think this is really important. Again, teaching our students and we ourselves recognizing the power of individuals. The cascades, thinking through the second and third order impact, and then the temporal asymmetry. And so the world, the condition these shifts are producing, it's outpacing our explanations. And I would say in some ways, I get overwhelmed. I read this stuff, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have to absorb yet another case and another set of interconnections here, right? It is very complicated. And so my job here as a scholar is to try to make sense of it and to try to help you. So 3 things I think we have to do differently is, first, we have to measure across domains. We have to think about measuring across domains, the geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geotechnological. And they're not separate literatures. They're not separate concerns. Economists should be talking to people like me as a political scientist, and I need to talk to all the tech folks out here. We need to be talking to one another, right? We cannot be in separate spaces. And then the second is we have to model people, not just institutions. I think we now understand the spirit of the law versus the law itself. They're both as important. And if individuals don't respect the spirit of the law, our institutions are fragile. They're very fragile. And so we need to uphold them. We need to vote. We need to be citizens. And then last, we need to theorize and think about the system's speed, right? And regime type, and thinking about how democracies, maybe we do need to grant our leaders a little bit more discretion in decisions, right? That might be a little scary, but that means we need to get out ahead of it. And this is what happened in New Zealand, right? She was able to implement a very sound policy because people trusted her as a prime minister. So I'm just going to leave these 7 questions to ponder for you, and open it up to questions from the audience. But I think we have to have a mic go around. So any questions?
Hi, a great presentation. Jason Gross, class of 1991 at Tufts. Last week, Bob Kagan, a noted Middle East hawk, wrote in The Atlantic that Iran is already the greatest strategic defeat in America's history because the only exit ramp is capitulation, leaving Iran in control of the strait. Do you agree with what he wrote last week?
I haven't seen that piece, but I know Bob Kagan's work, and I respect him a lot. What I'd say is I don't like black and white. It's not capitulation or not capitulation. I mean, at this point, Iran holds enough cards, notably the Straits, and others, right? It's shown that it can be a real pin in the side of the Middle East. So I don't think it's going to be capitulation or not capitulation. President Trump has made it very clear that he does not want a nuclear armed Iran. So if Iran would commit to saying and by the way, there's a difference between having nuclear material for civilian purposes, which by the way, Iran has a right? The Non-Proliferation Treaty guarantees that to any state. What Iran doesn't have a right to do, or what we, the West, doesn't think it should have the right to do, is enrich that uranium. So I think if the United States and others, China, Saudi Arabia now has joined Israel and wants Iran basically pushed out to sea. So I disagree with the idea that it's capitulation or not. Iran still holds some cards. It still has allies. It's got an ally in China. And if you read the reports coming out of the summit, a lot of that conversation was about Iran and that war, which to me shows that Iran still has cards to play. It doesn't have to fully capitulate, but it also means the United States doesn't have to fully capitulate. President Trump is right. The United States, once natural shale came on and we have our oil, we're not dependent on imports as much, but our European allies are. China is. And so, I think there's going to be a negotiated solution. And what we have to do is figure out what's a definition of victory for everyone. We have to talk about this as a victory for everyone so that everybody can save face. And that is the only way that this war is going to end.
So I have a question over here.
Oh, yes.
I'm curious about the demographics in China with the dips after the one-child policy. What do you look at their long-term abilities to affect world policy with decrease in population?
It's a great question, and I study demographics a lot and China a lot. And China has this 2+1 problem. Do you have any chalk in here? I love chalkboards. This is why I love this room. They have replaced all of our chalkboards with whiteboards, and they make you write too far. See, the 2+1 problem, right? These are people. That one's a little misshapen. And then down here, you've got one child holding up two parents, holding up four grandparents. So China has a problem because we have this thing called the dependency ratio, which is what makes economies sing. Because you want a lot of bodies supporting the little guys down here and the old guys up here, right? And the problem is China's middle has been cut out because of that one-child policy. And what's so tragic about that one-child policy, if you look at it, fertility rates were already coming down. So they didn't have to implement a very draconian. Women were already saying, because the education levels were coming up, a middle class was emerging, women have fewer children, right? I'm one of 6 children. I have 2, right? Within a generation, boom, that Irish Catholic need to have babies went away, right? But that's the world now. Fertility rates are coming down. So the thing is that what you're seeing happening, and Macron faces, is you're seeing retirement ages go up, or governments trying to increase retirement ages. I really believe that 70 is the new 40 and 80 is the new 50. You are all, some of you are from classes of like 1920 or something. I mean, it's really astonishing. I really pray that I'm as fit. No, I saw somebody, it was like 19, I don't even know, Marianne will tell me. Well, anyway, but the point being is that we're a lot healthier, a lot fitter today. And in China, the retirement rates or ages mandatory, they're in the 50s. A woman in China at 50, can you imagine? Oh my God, I'd be running Hawaii, Costa Rica, right? So what they need to do is pull up that dependency ratio. And the big issue is our brains. Can we learn we know how to build hips and knees and all of that. It's the brains, and work is being done on that. To keep our brains as we get into our 70s, 80s, 90s, because the truth is 110 is going to become the new normal. We think that humans are going to get to 110. Those people are already alive. You do these annuity tables, insurance companies, they're looking ahead, right? They know how long. Why is it 65? Why is 65 the magic number for retirement? That's when people used to die. Do governments expect to pay Social Security for somebody to live to 98? No, you're supposed to be dead, right? And so Macron tried to change the pension policy in France by a matter of months, right? Over years. And what happened? The French were pissed and they hit the streets. And they said, you are violating the social contract. Now, the good news for China is that she can just change it, and the government, the Politburo, they can, and they're doing that. And they're putting in place safety, social security nets to make sure that people can stay healthier longer. What are they doing in Japan? It's really interesting. Japan's going for robots, right? They're going for robots. They're very comfortable. It's very interesting in the Shinto faith. They're very comfortable with inanimate objects and imbuing them with spirit. Americans, we think that's kind of yucky, right? Like, oh, a robot serving me tea? I don't want that, right? So different cultures, different societies. So China is going to have to deal with that. But for now, it's okay. But she is very worried about that. The other issue he's worried about is he has all these surplus males, right? Because of that one-child policy. And there is some research that indicates that when you have surplus males, what do you do with all that testosterone? You put it in the military, right? So South Korea has the same problem. Women around the world, by the way, don't want men. They don't want to get married. They don't want mamonis. It is a global issue. Seriously, young women do not want to get married and have children. I was on the phone with my daughter, graduated from Tufts last May. She's in the Peace Corps in the DR. She just said to me, she said, yeah, when I'm 30, she said to me, when I'm 35, yeah, maybe I'll have a kid on my own. I'm thinking, oh, pumpkin, I want you married. I want lots of grandchildren, right? But they're thinking very differently. So in South Korea, what are they doing? They are actually importing women in. And so the big sociological experiment in South Korea is, will these mixed children be accepted by society, right? And they don't know. They don't know. Japan is unlikely to do that. It's one of the most xenophobic countries in the world. But Europe could solve its labor problem. Open the doors. Open them, right? Just open them. But they're not going to do it. Why? Back to the start of my talk, nationalism, xenophobia. People want to protect their culture, their language, their ability to raise their children in a culture and an environment that they're comfortable with. But the world is changing, so it's a great question, demographics. And with China, yeah, they're well aware of it, and so much so that the one-child policy is gone, and now there is the multi-child policy. Please, women, bear fruit and multiply. Have as many as you want. So I don't have the
So
mic.
I have the mic, so I'm
Yeah.
going to ask a question. Rich
Yeah.
Robbins, class of 91. One sphere of influence that you didn't mention is the role of academics.
Yeah.
And you mentioned even as recently as a few years ago, President Biden was reading your book, as with his senior administration. The current administration is very hostile to universities.
You think?
I do. And I'm wondering if the strongman playbook and if the forces enabling it, especially social media, the ability to go directly to the population. Trump has very few academics in his administration. Is that a factor for the future, and how might that play with just trends for world diplomacy?
I think it's going to be bad. You know, look, when I teach my students, and I've put this in print, I talk about the hubris humility index. I don't think I know everything. I know I don't know everything. And in fact, the more you know, the more you don't know, right? And the problem is, I think this administration is kind of on the hubristic side. They know everything. They don't need outside knowledge, right? I think the Biden administration actually was a little bit more here. And I think the Obama administration was in between. Obama was kind of a smug guy. He read, though. He was a voracious reader. And he was very well learned. So I worry about that because they're not reading history to learn the lessons, which means that you're going to be thinking in the moment, right? You're not looking at the broader trends from the past and what those, we know this, history doesn't repeat, but it echoes. It does echo. Why does it echo? Because of us, humans. Basic needs. We all need to eat. We care about our children. We care about our lives. We want roofs over our heads, right? Humans are a common factor in this. And leaders have to take responsibility and care for their citizens if they want them to not revolt against them at a minimum. So the fact that the academia is not being engaged and expertise is not being engaged in the same way, to me, it's a sign of that we're on this hubristic side. And I'm worried about it because I'm not saying that I have all the answers, but I think I asked pretty good questions and I'm going to probe you and I'm going to make you be more comfortable with the answer that you have, right? You may be right, but I'm going to make sure that you've asked the right series of questions that when you make a decision, that's the best decision you could have made under the circumstances. And that's not what we're facing right now. We need a balance. You have to have some hubris. Look, for me to stand up here in front of you and tell you I think I know something, it takes a little bit of hubris. But then you have to have humility, right? Because you want to keep learning and you want to question and probe so that you can do better. And the fact that, again, I worry about that. And I would say, you know, I lost a big, huge grant as a result of this administration in the third year, which matters. It was a multi-million-dollar grant to do research like this. It was with the University of Oxford, and I knew they were going to cut it because it was Oxford, it wasn't American. And they cut it in the third year, which is the year where you produce all the results. It was just so short-sighted. So look, I think that it's just a very bad decision to attack the university system so systematically and not draw on expertise.
Is it a pendulum or is it an ongoing trend?
It's both. I mean, how's this? It's an extreme on this side. I think it may come back. Who knows? You know, I don't have a crystal ball here. You know, the question we have to ask is how bad do certain decisions have to get in order for us to say, well, maybe we should get folks in the room. My understanding, so for MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, this measles outbreak, I think that Kennedy, they're now starting to look at some research actually within, and then the latest woman that's been appointed who is pro-vaccine. So things have to get pretty bad where they say, yeah, maybe let's bring in some safer academics. I don't know. I really hope that the pendulum swings back the other way, but it's going to take time. Look, we're all at a university. It's a private university. We're really elite here relative to many people around the world. We have to be much more humble about this and understand what our role is in society and try to understand where other people and where they're coming from and why they distrust us. Why they, or not us, well, why they distrust somebody like me, because they could think that I'm coming in and telling them what to do, which is not what I'm trying to do. I might come across that way, but then I need for them to tell me, I feel like you're telling me what to do. I think in some ways the academy was not good about conveying that we're actually doing this because we're trying to make the world a better place, that it became a little bit navel-gazy in some corners. So hopefully that answered. So the pendulum might go back. It's going to take some time.
Just quickly, I want to be careful with the time. There's microphones there. We're just saying after time. Let's take one question.
Let's take 3 more questions and I'll answer them at once, but ask them quickly. So a question mark at the end.
Yes, just curious, how much longer do you think Putin has on this earth and what happens?
I don't know. All right, so the first one is Putin. So Putin's longevity.
And what happens when he's not around anymore?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. Next.
Hi, I'm curious how you see the rapid development of artificial intelligence affecting your theory.
Yeah, okay.
I'm curious about the role of middle powers.
Yeah.
Why Canada has been able to unlock the strong man, even though there's secession movements and things like that.
Yeah.
This is what happens with the powers that you have.
Yeah, so her question, I'll start there. So her question is a great question, and my book deals with this. And in fact, I love Mr. Carney. He was the Bank of England governor when I was in Oxford, and he would come to Oxford. He was friends with our dean, Nairi Woods. He's a wonderful person. And what I love about what he's done is he's a good leader. And he's defending Canadian interests, and he's saying to the United States, enough. This is what we stand for, because right now the Europeans are the bastion of holding up sort of the Western institutions that were put in place. So what's interesting about this time is that the middle powers actually have more power, more authority, more influence than any moment, because we're in a liminal period. China right now is standing up under President Xi. We're the big one. We're the responsible, mature state. We're stable. If you make contracts with us, we're going to abide by them. We're not going to slap tariffs on you. We're not going to invade you, right? So Canada can go to China, but then it also needs the United States. It's on the border. So middle powers, we talk about hedging. Right? So they're in a position right now where they can actually hedge and have actually more influence and perhaps get their interests back in a way that they weren't able to do during the Cold War, where they had to choose one side or the other. This is the Gulf states. I mean, the Gulf states are really brilliant about playing off China, Russia, the United States, and Singapore, right? So Singapore relies on the United States for security, but it recognizes that China is an economic behemoth. Vietnam, I just got back from Vietnam. Brilliant strategy. It made peace with the United States, which astonishes me given what we did to that country, right? But it also trades fervently with China and with the United States. So middle and small powers, they can hedge. And Carney has shown that you can do it quite effectively. But Carney also has European states behind him because he's got not only the Commonwealth with all the, how many states are in the Commonwealth? 38, I think. But then he also has NATO. AI, there really needs to be a global governance regime. It's like biotech, right? And we'll see, I haven't seen much come out from the summit on the AI because the United States and China are in a head-to-head battle. China came out with DeepSeek. It's doing it differently. It's doing it as a public domain. The United States, we're doing it through private corporations. AI it can be very beautiful. Look, it started, with a lot of people started using it for medical procedures, for reading x-rays, and it was much more accurate. It didn't miss things. But we really do need to think about some sort of global governance regime. And the sad fact is right now the world, especially amongst the great powers, is not united on that because they're in a head-to-head competition. Putin longevity, you know what I can't stand about these dictators is they live so long. Really, they live so long, and it's because they have really good health care. So Mugabe, I mean, the guy lived into his 90s. Museveni was a good guy, right, in Uganda, but now he's living so long. So I can't tell you when Putin, but supposedly, he's not doing great. He's been on steroids for a long time, which is why he looks puffy, right? So he probably has something. Look, these are older men. When you get older, you get a little bit, you notice the cricks and the cracks. But he has excellent health care. And so who knows how long he's going to live. And then what happens after, they'll find it. I think another strong man will step forward. That is just the way, the Russian Empire was, the Soviet Union was, and the Russian system was. Putin has yet to really be fully elected as a democratic. Medvedev was actually. But Putin was selected by Yeltsin. I hereby announce you're the president of the Russian Federation. And then we had the Chechen operation in the theater. Oh, and then he goes and he blasts Grozny. Oh, and then we have elections, right? So Putin really is an autocrat. And we'll probably end up with another one in the future, in part because he's done a very, very good job of killing the opposition in that country, literally killing the opposition. All right, thank you, everybody.
Is it we're okay? Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Monica. That was wonderful. I wanted to let everybody know we have one more faculty talk tomorrow afternoon in this room at 1:30 with Shelley Payton, who is a professor of biomedical engineering and chair of biomedical engineering, talking about breast cancer and beyond, advances in women's health from the Tufts Biomedical Engineering Department. So please, I hope to see you there. It'll be great. Thank you. Have a good rest of your night.